You couldn't solve a simple arithmetic problem if your life depended on it, Marcus. But here's a challenge: solve this equation, and my entire year's salary is yours. What happens when an arrogant teacher's mockery becomes the biggest mistake of his career? In today's story, a quiet 12-year-old black student faces humiliation in front of his entire class when his math teacher singles him out with an impossible challenge. But sometimes, the most unassuming students carry the most extraordinary secrets. What unfolds next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about judging others by appearance. This is a story that will shake you to your core and remind you why every child deserves respect. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me to give you better stories in next videos. If you are watching my story for the first time, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Roosevelt Middle School's advanced mathematics classroom, casting long shadows across the worn wooden desks. Mr. Harold Whitman stood at the front of the room, his half-bald head gleaming under the fluorescent lights as he surveyed his 7th grade class with barely concealed disdain. His mustache twitched with each dismissive glance, particularly when his eyes landed on Marcus Johnson, the only black student in his advanced mathematics class. Today, class, Mr. Whitman announced, his voice dripping with condescension, we're going to explore something that will separate the truly gifted from those who, well, let's just say, from those who are here by mistake. His gaze lingered pointedly on Marcus, who sat quietly in the 3rd row, his dark eyes focused on the blank notebook before him. Sarah Chen, the class valedictorian, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd noticed how Mr. Whitman always seemed to direct his harshest comments toward Marcus, despite the boy's consistent B+ average. Tommy Rodriguez, sitting next to Marcus, clenched his jaw but remained silent. They'd all learned that challenging Mr. Whitman only made things worse. I've prepared a special problem, Mr. Whitman continued, turning to write on the board with exaggerated flourishes. A real mathematician's challenge. Something that even college professors might struggle with. He finished writing and stepped back, revealing a complex differential equation filled with multiple variables, integral symbols, and nested functions that seemed to dance across the board in a maze of mathematical complexity. The classroom fell silent. Even Sarah, who usually tackled every problem with confidence, stared at the board with widening eyes. This wasn't just advanced for 7th grade, it was advanced for high school, maybe even college level. Now, Mr. Whitman said, his thin lips curling into what could only be described as a cruel smile, I know most of you won't even understand what you're looking at. But perhaps. He paused dramatically, his eyes finding Marcus again. Perhaps our Mr. Johnson would like to try? After all, affirmative action got you into this class, didn't it? Might as well see if you can justify your presence here. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several students gasped audibly. Tommy's hand instinctively moved toward Marcus's desk in a gesture of support, but Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. In fact, Mr. Whitman continued, clearly enjoying himself now, let's make this interesting. You couldn't solve a simple arithmetic problem if your life depended on it, Marcus. But here's a challenge: solve this equation, and my entire year's salary is yours. He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. That's $85,000, boy. More money than your family has probably ever seen. The cruelty of the statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. One student in the back row whispered, that's not right, but Mr. Whitman silenced them with a glare. What's wrong? No one wants to defend Mr. Johnson? No one thinks he can do it? Mr. Whitman walked slowly between the desks, his footsteps echoing ominously. This is what happens when we lower our standards, class. When we let anyone into advanced programs just to fill quotas. Marcus finally looked up, his 12-year-old face calm despite the humiliation being heaped upon him. His eyes met Mr. Whitman's, and for just a moment, something flickered there, not anger, not hurt, but something else entirely. Something that made Mr. Whitman pause mid-stride. Well, Marcus? Mr. Whitman recovered quickly, masking his momentary unease with renewed mockery. Are you going to sit there like a statue, or are you going to admit that this is beyond you? There's no shame in acknowledging your limitations. In fact, it would be the first intelligent thing you've done all year. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. 24 pairs of eyes watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few, influenced by Mr. Whitman's behavior, seemed almost eager to see Marcus fail. Tommy finally spoke up, his voice shaking with anger. "Mr. Whitman, this isn't fair. You can't." "Can't what, Mr. Rodriguez?" Mr. Whitman whirled on him. "Can't challenge my students? Can't expect excellence? Or can't point out when someone clearly doesn't belong?" He turned back to Marcus. "Last chance, Johnson. Admit you can't do it, and we'll move on with our lesson. Continue wasting our time, and I'll have to speak to Principal Carter about your fitness for this class." The threat hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew that being removed from advanced mathematics would devastate any student's academic record. For a 12-year-old, it would be a blow that could affect his entire educational future. The injustice of it all made Sarah's stomach turn. She opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Whitman's sharp glance silenced her. Marcus slowly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. At 12 years old, he was small for his age, having to look up at Mr. Whitman's medium height. But there was something in his posture, a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the space around him. He walked to the front of the classroom with measured steps, each one deliberate and unhurried. "I'll need about 20 minutes, Marcus said quietly, picking up a piece of chalk. Mr. Whitman burst out laughing. 20 minutes? Boy, you couldn't solve this in 20 years. But by all means, embarrass yourself. Class, pay attention. This is what happens when pride overtakes ability." As Marcus raised the chalk to the board, his hand steady and sure, not a single person in that room could have imagined what was about to unfold. The quiet boy they dismissed, the student their teacher had mocked and belittled, was about to change everything they thought they knew about potential, prejudice, and the danger of judging someone by the color of their skin. The chalk moved across the board with a soft, rhythmic scratching that seemed to hypnotize the classroom. Marcus's small hand worked with surprising confidence, creating neat rows of numbers and symbols that flowed like a mathematical symphony. Mr. Whitman stood to the side, arms crossed, his mustache twitching with amusement as he waited for the inevitable moment when Marcus would falter. "Class, observe carefully," Mr. Whitman announced, his voice carrying that patronizing tone he'd perfected over his 30-year career. "This is what we call false confidence. Mr. Johnson here thinks that by writing random numbers, he can somehow stumble upon the solution. It's actually quite sad, really." But Sarah Chen, watching from her front row seat, noticed something different. Marcus wasn't writing randomly at all. His approach was methodical, systematic. He'd started by breaking down the complex differential equation into smaller components, identifying each variable and its relationship to the others. It was exactly what her older sister, a college sophomore, had shown her once when she'd visited her at university. Tommy leaned forward in his seat, his eyes widening. He might not understand the advanced mathematics, but he recognized the look on Marcus's face. It was the same expression he'd seen when they played chess during lunch, complete focus, absolute concentration. Marcus was in his element. "Oh, this is rich," Mr. Whitman chuckled, moving closer to examine Marcus's work. "You're attempting to use integration by parts? Do you even know what that means, or did you just see it in a movie somewhere?" He turned to the class. "This is what happens when students try to punch above their weight class. They pick up terms and techniques they don't understand and throw them around hoping something sticks." Marcus paused for a moment, the chalk hovering an inch from the board. Without turning around, he spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Actually, Mr. Whitman, I'm using a combination of integration by parts and substitution. The traditional approach won't work here because of the nested functions. You need to transform the equation first." The classroom fell silent. Even the usual whispers and fidgeting stopped. Mr. Whitman's face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No seventh grader should know those terms, let alone understand when and how to apply them. "Lucky guess," Mr. Whitman sputtered, recovering his composure. You probably heard those words somewhere and are just repeating them. Continue with your attempt. I'm sure the class finds this very entertaining. Marcus simply nodded and returned to his work. His chalk danced across the board, creating elegant mathematical proofs that seemed to build upon each other like a carefully constructed tower. He worked through the first transformation, showing each step with the kind of clarity that would make a textbook author envious. Sarah pulled out her phone under her desk, secretly recording what was happening. Something told her this moment needed to be preserved. She wasn't the only one. Tommy had the same idea, his phone barely visible as he captured the growing equation on the board. 5 minutes gone, Mr. Whitman announced loudly, checking his watch with theatrical precision. Only 15 more minutes of this charade. I hope you're all learning something from this, namely, the importance of knowing your limitations. But as the minutes ticked by, Mr. Whitman's smugness began to waver. Marcus had filled nearly half the board now, and even to someone trying not to look too closely, it was becoming clear that this wasn't random scribbling. There was a logic to it, a flow that even the most mathematically challenged student could sense. Mr. Whitman, Sarah finally spoke up, unable to contain herself any longer. I think he's actually solving it. Nonsense. Mr. Whitman snapped, but his voice cracked slightly. Miss Chen, I expected better from you than to be taken in by this performance. Just because someone can copy formulas from the internet doesn't mean they understand them. But he's not copying, Tommy interjected, finding courage in Sarah's support. He's deriving them. Look at step 7, that's not in any textbook I've seen. Mr. Whitman strode to the board, his face now a dangerous shade of purple. He studied Marcus's work, looking for errors, for any sign that this was some kind of trick or cheat. But the mathematics was flawless. More than flawless, it was elegant, the kind of solution that mathematicians called beautiful. Where did you get this? Mr. Whitman demanded, his voice low and threatening. Who gave you the answer? There's no way, absolutely no way, that a 12-year-old could solve this problem. Especially not. He caught himself, but everyone knew what he'd been about to say. Marcus set down the chalk and turned to face his teacher for the first time since beginning the problem. His young face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, not defiance, exactly, but a kind of quiet strength that seemed beyond his years. Mr. Whitman, Marcus said evenly, you said if I solved this equation, your salary would be mine. Did you mean that, or were you just trying to humiliate me in front of everyone? The question hung in the air like a challenge of its own. Mr. Whitman's face cycled through several emotions, disbelief, anger, fear, and something that might have been the first stirrings of panic. That was obviously a figure of speech, Mr. Whitman stammered. No reasonable person would think, so you were lying? Marcus asked, his voice still perfectly calm. You made a promise you never intended to keep, just to make me look foolish? The moral reversal was complete. Suddenly, it wasn't Marcus who looked foolish, it was Mr. Whitman. The teacher who had spent the last 15 minutes mocking and belittling a child now found himself on the defensive, trying to explain away his cruel behavior. I want you to finish the problem, Sarah said suddenly, standing up. Marcus, please finish it. We all want to see. Yeah, Tommy agreed, also standing. Finish it, Marcus. One by one, other students began to stand, even those who had initially seemed to side with Mr. Whitman. There was something powerful happening in the room, a shift in the balance of power that had nothing to do with age or authority and everything to do with truth and justice. Marcus looked at his classmates, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the first emotion he'd shown since the ordeal began. He picked up the chalk again and turned back to the board. 10 more minutes, he said quietly. That's all I need. Mr. Whitman stood frozen, watching as his carefully constructed world, a world where he was the unquestioned authority, where certain students belonged and others didn't, began to crumble with each stroke of chalk on the board. The impossible was happening right before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The classroom had transformed into something resembling a courtroom, with Marcus as the prosecutor methodically building his case on the blackboard. Each mathematical step was another piece of evidence, each equation a testimony to his brilliance. Mr. Whitman paced behind him like a caged animal, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor in an increasingly agitated rhythm. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Whitman muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't know what kind of trick this is, but I won't stand for it. Johnson, tell me right now, who helped you prepare for this? Did you somehow see my lesson plan? Did another teacher?" "Mr. Whitman," Sarah interrupted, her voice stronger now, "Marcus sits next to me in every class. He's never cheated. Not once. Maybe he's just good at math?" The suggestion seemed to physically pain Mr. Whitman. His face contorted as if he'd bitten into something sour. "Good at math? This isn't just good at math, Miss Chen. This is graduate-level mathematics. Are you suggesting that this child is some kind of prodigy?" The word child came out twisted, laden with implications that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. Two students in the back row, Jennifer Walsh and David Kim, exchanged meaningful glances. They'd been in Mr. Whitman's class long enough to recognize the pattern. It wasn't the first time he'd targeted a student of color, but it had never been this blatant, this cruel. Marcus continued working, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around him. He'd moved on to the second half of the problem now, applying advanced calculus concepts that most of the students had never seen before. His handwriting remained neat and precise, even as the tension in the room ratcheted up to unbearable levels. "I'm calling Principal Carter," Mr. Whitman announced suddenly, reaching for the classroom phone. "This is clearly some kind of disruption to the learning environment. Johnson is making a mockery of this classroom with his performance." "Wait." Tommy stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You can't call the principal because a student is solving a problem you gave him. That's crazy." Mr. Whitman whirled on Tommy, his finger pointing accusingly. "Mr. Rodriguez, sit down immediately or you'll be joining your friend in the principal's office. I won't tolerate insubordination in my classroom." "Insubordination?" Jennifer Walsh finally spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. All he did was defend Marcus. "You're the one who made this whole big show, Mr. Whitman. You're the one who said Marcus couldn't do it because she stopped, but everyone knew what she'd been about to say." The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. What had started as one teacher humiliating one student had become something larger, a moment of reckoning that had been building for months, maybe years. Students who had previously remained silent, either out of fear or indifference, were finding their voices. David Kim raised his hand, an oddly formal gesture given the circumstances. "Mr. Whitman, I'd like to point out that Marcus has 15 more minutes. You said 20 minutes. It's only fair to let him finish." "Fair?" Mr. Whitman laughed, but it was a hollow sound, devoid of any real mirth. "Since when has fairness been a concern in mathematics? Either you can do the work or you can't." And clearly, he was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Everyone turned to see Principal Evelyn Carter standing in the doorway, her professional suit impeccable, her expression unreadable. As an African-American woman who had worked her way up through the education system, she commanded respect through her mere presence. "Mr. Whitman," she said calmly, stepping into the room. "I was walking past and couldn't help but notice some raised voices. Is everything all right here?" Mr. Whitman's face went through several rapid transformations before settling on what he clearly thought was a professional smile. "Principal Carter, perfect timing. I was just about to call you. We have a situation here with Marcus Johnson. He's being disruptive, refusing to acknowledge his limitations, and he's solving a math problem," Sarah interjected, surprising herself with her boldness. "A really hard one that Mr. Whitman said was impossible for any of us, especially Marcus." Principal Carter's eyes swept the room, taking in the tension, the students on their feet, and finally settling on Marcus, who had paused in his work to turn and look at her. Her gaze moved to the board, and even from the doorway, she could see the complexity of what was written there. "Marcus," she said gently, "would you like to explain what's happening here?" Marcus glanced at Mr. Whitman, then back at Principal Carter. When he spoke, his voice was steady but respectful. Mr. Whitman gave me a challenge, ma'am. He said if I could solve this equation, he'd give me his yearly salary. I'm trying to solve it. He's cheating somehow, Mr. Whitman interjected quickly. There's no way a 7th grader could. I'd like to see him finish, Principal Carter said, cutting him off with a tone that brooked no argument. How much time does he have left? 14 minutes, Tommy supplied helpfully, checking the clock. Principal Carter nodded and moved to stand where she could better see the board. Please continue, Marcus. I'd like to observe. The addition of the principal to their audience seemed to rattle Mr. Whitman even more. He fidgeted with his tie, smoothed his mustache repeatedly, and kept clearing his throat as if preparing to speak, only to remain silent. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. He was no longer the ultimate authority, he was a man watching his credibility crumble in real time. Marcus returned to the board, his movements perhaps a bit more confident now that Principal Carter was present. He worked through a particularly complex transformation, one that required him to use mathematical principles that weren't typically taught until advanced college courses. Several students took out their phones, not to text or browse social media, but to look up the symbols and techniques Marcus was using. Oh my God, Jennifer whispered, staring at her phone screen. This is from a graduate-level textbook. He's doing it right. Every step is perfect. The whisper carried in the quiet room, and Mr. Whitman's face went from red to an alarming shade of white. He opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in his teaching career, Harold Whitman was completely speechless. Principal Carter pulled out her own phone and appeared to be texting someone. Her expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer that might have been satisfaction or perhaps vindication. She'd received complaints about Mr. Whitman before, but they'd always been vague, hard to prove. This, however, was happening right in front of her. As Marcus neared the final steps of the solution, the entire class seemed to hold its breath. Even those who couldn't follow the mathematics could sense that something extraordinary was happening. The boy their teacher had mocked and humiliated was not just meeting the challenge, he was exceeding it in ways none of them could have imagined. With 5 minutes still remaining on his self-imposed deadline, Marcus wrote the final answer, circled it, and set down the chalk. He turned to face the room, his young face calm but his eyes bright with an intelligence that could no longer be denied or dismissed. The silence that followed was deafening. 24 students, one principal, and one very shaken teacher all stared at the board, at the elegant solution that proved beyond any doubt that Marcus Johnson was no ordinary 12-year-old. Well, Principal Carter said finally, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I think we need to have a conversation, Mr. Whitman. A very serious conversation. Principal Carter stepped closer to the board, her eyes scanning Marcus's work with the careful attention of someone who understood more about mathematics than her administrative role might suggest. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to spotlight the elegant solution, making the chalk marks glow against the green surface. Marcus, she said, her voice gentle but carrying an undertone of steel, this is exceptional work. Where did you learn these techniques? Before Marcus could answer, Mr. Whitman found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. Principal Carter, this is clearly some kind of setup. There's no way, absolutely no way, that this student could have solved this problem. He must have had help, or perhaps he saw the problem beforehand, or, Harold, Principal Carter cut him off, using his first name in a way that made him flinch. I've been standing here for the last 10 minutes. I watched Marcus work through the final steps myself. There was no cheating. No hidden notes. No assistance. She paused, letting her words sink in. What I did see was a brilliant young mind being publicly humiliated by an educator who should know better. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several students unconsciously leaned back in their seats, as if trying to distance themselves from the confrontation brewing at the front of the classroom. Tommy, emboldened by the principal's presence, raised his hand. Principal Carter, this isn't the first time. Mr. Whitman always picks on Marcus, and sometimes on me and the other. He stopped, glancing around at his classmates, some of whom nodded in silent support. That's a lie. Mr. Whitman sputtered, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I treat all my students equally. If some students can't keep up with advanced mathematics, that's not my fault. I maintain high standards. High standards? Sarah stood up, her usual reserve overwhelmed by indignation. You told Marcus he was only here because of affirmative action. You said his family had probably never seen $85,000. That's not about standards, that's about. Miss Chen, you're out of line, Mr. Whitman interrupted, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He looked around the room, perhaps hoping to find support, but saw only accusatory faces and recording phones. The reality of the situation was beginning to dawn on him. Principal Carter held up a hand for silence. I think we need to hear from Marcus. Young man, would you please explain your solution? Walk us through your reasoning. Marcus nodded and turned back to the board. When he spoke, his voice was clear and confident, a stark contrast to his usual quiet demeanor. The problem Mr. Whitman gave us is a nonlinear differential equation with multiple variables. Most people would try to solve it directly, but that's actually the trap. You need to recognize that it can be transformed into a system of linear equations through a specific substitution. He pointed to the first section of his work. Here, I used the Laplace transform to convert the differential equation into an algebraic equation. Then I applied partial fraction decomposition to break it down into manageable components. Several students were frantically taking notes, recognizing that they were witnessing something special. Even those who couldn't follow the mathematics completely could hear the authority in Marcus's voice, the deep understanding that came through in every word. Mr. Whitman watched with growing horror as his 12-year-old student explained concepts that some of his colleagues at the high school would struggle with. Each word was another nail in the coffin of his prejudices, another crack in the foundation of his worldview. The really tricky part, Marcus continued, warming to his subject, was this section here. The nested functions create a recursive relationship that seems unsolvable at first. But if you recognize the pattern, you can use a technique called fixed-point iteration to converge on the solution. Where did you learn about fixed-point iteration? Principal Carter asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Marcus hesitated for the first time, glancing at Tommy as if seeking permission. His friend gave him an encouraging nod. My mom teaches at MIT, Marcus said quietly. She's a mathematics professor. My dad's an aerospace engineer. They've been teaching me advanced math since I was 6. The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Mr. Whitman's face went through several colors before settling on a sickly gray. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as the implications of what he'd done crashed over him. Your mother is a professor at MIT, he finally managed to croak out. Dr. Amelia Johnson, Marcus confirmed. She specializes in applied mathematics and chaos theory. She's published over 40 papers and has 2 books on differential equations. Principal Carter's expression hardened. So you've been in Mr. Whitman's class all year, consistently performing well, and he never bothered to learn anything about your background or your capabilities? I didn't want special treatment, Marcus said, his young voice carrying a maturity beyond his years. My parents and I agreed that I should be in regular classes for the social experience. I just wanted to learn with my friends, not be singled out as different. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Marcus had wanted to avoid being singled out, and instead, he'd been singled out in the cruelest possible way, not for his gifts, but for his skin color, not for special treatment, but for humiliation. Mr. Whitman, Principal Carter said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority, I need you to call Marcus's parents immediately. They need to be informed about what happened here today. I don't think that's necessary, Mr. Whitman stammered, the full reality of his situation finally hitting home. This was all just a misunderstanding. I was trying to challenge my students, by offering your salary as a bet? By making assumptions about a student's family finances? By suggesting a child was only in your class because of affirmative action? Principal Carter's voice rose with each question. Call them. Now. As Mr. Whitman moved to his desk with the enthusiasm of a man walking to his execution, Marcus stood quietly at the board, surrounded by the mathematical proof of his brilliance. Tommy moved to stand beside his friend, offering silent support. "For what it's worth," Tommy said quietly, "I always knew you were smart. I just didn't know you were scary smart." Marcus managed a small smile. "I just wanted to be normal. To have friends. To not be the genius kid for once." "Yeah, well," Tommy grinned, "I think that ship has sailed." Around them, their classmates were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the solving of an impossible problem, but the unmasking of prejudice and the triumph of a young boy who had wanted nothing more than to be seen as just another student. As Mr. Whitman dialed the phone with shaking fingers, Principal Carter moved to stand beside Marcus. "You know," she said quietly, "in all my years in education, I've seen many bright students. But what you did today, standing up for yourself with dignity and intelligence instead of anger, that's a different kind of brilliance altogether." Marcus looked up at her, and for the first time since the ordeal began, his eyes showed a hint of the hurt he'd been hiding. "I just wanted him to see me as a student, not as a color." Principal Carter placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know, Marcus. And I'm sorry you had to prove your worth this way. No child should have to." The phone call connected, and everyone in the room held their breath as Mr. Whitman began to speak, his voice trembling as he tried to explain to Dr. Amelia Johnson why her son was standing at a blackboard, having just solved a graduate-level mathematics problem on a dare born from prejudice. The silence in the classroom was broken by the sharp click of heels in the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Mr. Whitman stood frozen at his desk, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face the color of old parchment. Through the receiver, everyone could hear a woman's voice, controlled, articulate, but with an undertone that suggested barely contained fury. "We'll be there in 10 minutes, the voice said with crisp finality. "And Mr. Whitman? Don't you dare leave that classroom." The line went dead. Mr. Whitman slowly placed the phone back in its cradle, his hand trembling visibly. The confident, condescending teacher who had started this confrontation was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd aged 10 years in as many minutes. "Perhaps," Principal Carter said, her tone businesslike, "the rest of the class should be dismissed early today. This situation requires—" "No," Marcus spoke up, surprising everyone. "They should stay. They saw what happened. They should see how it ends." Principal Carter studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But I expect everyone to remain respectful and quiet. This is not entertainment, it's a learning moment for us all." The students settled back into their seats, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and uncertainty. Saracen still had her phone out, though she'd stopped recording out of respect for Marcus. Tommy remained standing beside his friend, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. Mr. Whitman sank into his chair, staring at the equation on the board as if it were his own mathematical proof of failure. His mustache, usually groomed to perfection, now seemed to droop with defeat. "I didn't mean—" he began, then stopped, apparently unable to finish the thought. "Didn't mean what?" Principal Carter asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Didn't mean to reveal your prejudices? Didn't mean to humiliate a brilliant child? Or didn't mean to get caught?" Before he could answer, the classroom door opened with enough force to make everyone jump. Dr. Amelia Johnson entered first, and the family resemblance to Marcus was immediately apparent, the same intelligent eyes, the same dignified bearing, though hers were currently flashing with maternal fury. She was dressed in a crisp business suit that somehow made her appear even more formidable. Behind her came James Johnson, Marcus's father. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of casual clothes that suggested he'd dropped everything to come here. His expression was harder to read than his wife's, but the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. "Marcus," Dr. Johnson said, her voice softening as she saw her son. She crossed to him in 3 quick strides, placing her hands on his shoulders and examining him as if checking for physical wounds. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom," Marcus assured her, though his voice was smaller now, more like the 12-year-old he was. "I solved the problem." Dr. Johnson's eyes moved to the board, taking in the equation and solution in one swift glance. Her expression shifted from concern to professional interest to pride, all in the space of a heartbeat. Fixed point iteration for the nested functions. Elegant choice. She turned to face Mr. Whitman, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another degree. Though I doubt you expected that when you designed this little trap. Dr. Johnson, Mr. Whitman started to rise from his chair, but James Johnson's steady gaze kept him seated. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. No, Dr. Johnson cut him off. A misunderstanding is when you accidentally call someone by the wrong name. This was targeted harassment of a child. My child. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling. Interesting thing about having a son who's cautious by nature, he documents everything. Would you like to see the texts he's sent us throughout the year? Mr. Whitman said I probably couldn't understand the homework. Mr. Whitman asked if my parents could even help me with math. Mr. Whitman said I was bringing down the class average. With each quote, Mr. Whitman seemed to shrink further into his chair. Several students gasped they'd witnessed some of these incidents but hadn't realized Marcus had been documenting them. James Johnson finally spoke, his deep voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. We enrolled Marcus in public school because we wanted him to have a normal childhood. To make friends, to learn social skills, to be part of a community. He looked directly at Mr. Whitman. We didn't expect him to need protection from the very people meant to nurture his growth. The irony, Dr. Johnson continued, her voice taking on a lecturing tone that her MIT students would have recognized, is that Marcus has been holding himself back all year. He could have solved every problem you put on that board in minutes. He could have corrected your occasional errors, oh yes, we've noticed those too. But he didn't, because we taught him to respect his teachers. She paused. Clearly, we need to add an addendum about teachers who don't deserve respect. Principal Carter cleared her throat. Dr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, I want to assure you that this behavior does not represent our school's values. I'll be launching a full investigation. With all due respect, Principal Carter, Dr. Johnson interrupted, this goes beyond one teacher's behavior. This is about a system that allowed it to continue. She gestured to the classroom full of students. How many of these children have stories similar to Marcus's? How many have been made to feel less than because of assumptions about their race, their background, their potential? Several students shifted uncomfortably. Tommy raised his hand tentatively. Mr. Whitman told me last month that I should consider dropping to regular math because my people are better with their hands than with numbers. Jennifer Walsh added quietly, he said girls like me should focus on subjects that don't require masculine logical thinking. David Kim nodded. He asked me if my parents owned a restaurant or a dry cleaner when I told him my dad was a theoretical physicist. With each revelation, the scope of Mr. Whitman's prejudices became clearer. This wasn't just about one incident with Marcus, it was a pattern of behavior that had been poisoning the classroom environment all year. Dr. Johnson turned to address the students directly. Let me be clear about something. Intelligence, talent, and potential exist in every race, every gender, every socioeconomic background. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not just wrong, they're actively harmful to your development. The equation on that board, James Johnson added, is complex, yes. But the real complexity lies in navigating a world where you're judged by your appearance before your abilities. Marcus solved both problems today, the mathematical one and the social one. He proved his worth in a game where the rules were stacked against him. Mr. Whitman finally found his voice, though it was weak and thready. I never meant to. I have high standards for all my students. No, Marcus spoke up, surprising everyone with the firmness in his young voice. You have high standards for students who look like you and low expectations for everyone else. That's not the same thing. The clarity of the 12-year-old's observation hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Mr. Whitman opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently recognizing the futility of denial in the face of such truth. Dr. Johnson pulled out a business card and handed it to Principal Carter. This is our attorney's information. We'll be pursuing this matter formally. Not for money, despite Mr. Whitman's assumptions, were quite comfortable financially. But this pattern of discrimination needs to be addressed at a systemic level. Mom, Marcus said quietly, he did promise me his salary if I solved the equation. A ghost of a smile crossed Dr. Johnson's face. Did he now? In front of witnesses? In front of the whole class, Sarah Chen confirmed, finding her courage. He was very specific about it. $85,000. Well then, Dr. Johnson said, her smile growing slightly wider and considerably sharper, that's a verbal contract, isn't it? Made in front of 24 witnesses. Though I suspect Marcus would prefer to donate it to a scholarship fund for underrepresented students in STEM fields. Wouldn't you, sweetheart? Marcus nodded, a small smile finally breaking through his serious expression. That would be good. Help kids who actually need it. The poetic justice of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. Mr. Whitman, who had mockingly offered his salary believing it was safe, now faced the very real possibility of having to pay it not to Marcus, whom he'd assumed needed it, but to help other students whom he might have similarly underestimated. The impromptu conference had moved to Principal Carter's office, but the reverberations continued to spread throughout Roosevelt Middle School. Within minutes, word had traveled through the hallways like wildfire. Marcus Johnson, the quiet kid from Mr. Whitman's class, was actually a genius, and Mr. Whitman was in serious trouble. In the principal's office, the atmosphere was electric with tension and possibility. Principal Carter sat behind her desk, fingers steepled, while the Johnson family occupied the chairs across from her. Mr. Whitman stood to the side, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Before we proceed with any formal complaints, Principal Carter said, I'd like to fully understand the scope of Marcus's abilities. Dr. Johnson, would you help me understand your son's educational background? Dr. Johnson's expression softened slightly as she looked at her son. Marcus showed an affinity for numbers before he could properly speak. By age 4, he was doing multiplication. By 6, he was working through my undergraduate textbooks for fun. She smiled at the memory. We had him tested at 7. His IQ is, well, let's just say it's in a range that most tests can't accurately measure. But we didn't want him to be a circus act, James Johnson added firmly. We've seen what happens to child prodigies who are pushed too hard, too fast. They burn out, they struggle socially, they miss out on childhood. So we made a decision to let Marcus set his own pace. Marcus shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable being discussed like he wasn't there. I like regular school, he said quietly. I have friends. I play basketball at lunch. I'm in the drama club. I just also happen to like math. Like math, Dr. Johnson laughed softly. Last month, he found an error in one of my published papers. He was reading it for fun and noticed a calculation mistake in Theorem 3.4. Principal Carter's eyes widened. And you've been sitting in a 7th grade math class all year, being told you don't belong? I belong with my friends, Marcus said firmly. Being smart doesn't mean I should be isolated from other kids my age. But surely, Mr. Whitman interjected, apparently unable to help himself, keeping him in regular classes is holding him back. He should be in advanced programs, special schools, like the one that would have accepted him if he were white? Dr. Johnson's voice cut like a blade. The same programs you assumed he couldn't qualify for? The opportunities you never told him about because you'd already decided he wasn't worthy? Mr. Whitman fell silent again, the contradiction in his positions apparently just occurring to him. Principal Carter's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted. It seems word has gotten out. I have 3 school board members asking what's happening, and... She paused, reading further, a local news station asking if it's true that a student was discriminated against for solving an impossible math problem. How did they? Mr. Whitman started, then stopped, remembering all the phones that had been out during the incident. Social media, Principal Carter said dryly. Several students posted videos. They're already going viral. The headline seems to be Racist Teacher Offers Salary to Black Student for Solving Problem, Loses. Mr. Whitman's face went from pale to positively ghostly. "This could ruin me," he whispered. "Your actions could ruin you," James Johnson corrected. "The videos are just evidence." There was a knock at the door, and Principal Carter's assistant peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a Professor David Chen on video call. He says Dr. Johnson asked him to verify some mathematical work." Dr. Johnson smiled. "David is the head of MIT's mathematics department. I thought an independent verification might be helpful, given Mr. Whitman's continued skepticism." The large screen on Principal Carter's wall came to life, showing a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. "Amelia, I got your message. This is about Marcus?" "Hello, Professor Chen," Marcus said politely, and the man's face lit up. "Marcus, how's my favorite young mathematician? Still working through those topology problems I sent you?" "I finished them last week," Marcus replied. "The third one was tricky, but I think I found an elegant solution using continuous deformation." Professor Chen laughed delightedly. "Of course you did. Now, what's this about a differential equation?" Dr. Johnson quickly explained the situation while her phone transmitted an image of the board to Professor Chen. They watched as his expression shifted from amusement to interest to outright admiration. "This is graduate-level work," he confirmed, looking directly at the camera. "The problem itself is sophisticated, but the solution shows not just knowledge but deep understanding. The choice to use fixed-point iteration here is inspired. Most of my doctoral students wouldn't have seen that approach." He leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Who designed this problem?" "I did," Mr. Whitman admitted reluctantly. "Then you're either a better mathematician than your behavior suggests, or you copied it from somewhere thinking no one could solve it," Professor Chen said bluntly. Either way, offering it to a 12-year-old as an impossible challenge was pedagogically irresponsible and ethically questionable. "The boy's a genius," Mr. Whitman protested. "He doesn't need to be in my class. Every child needs teachers who believe in them," Professor Chen interrupted. "Marcus is indeed gifted, extraordinarily so. I've been informally mentoring him for 2 years now, and his potential is limitless. But you know what he needs more than advanced mathematics? He needs a childhood. Friends. Normal experiences. Teachers who see him as a whole person, not just a skin color or a test score." Sarah Chen's voice came from off-screen. "Uncle David? Is that you?" Professor Chen smiled. "Sarah, I didn't know you were in Marcus's class. How's your sister doing at MIT?" "She's good. She says your advanced calculus class is killing her, though." "Tell her to come to office hours," Professor Chen said with a laugh, then grew serious again. "Principal Carter, I hope you understand what you have in Marcus Johnson. He's not just a gifted student, he's a once-in-a-generation mind. The fact that he's also a well-adjusted, kind young man is a testament to his parents' wisdom in letting him grow at his own pace." "But Mr. Whitman," Professor Chen continued, his tone hardening, "what you did today wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. You could have crushed this brilliant young spirit with your prejudice. How many other students have you dismissed based on your assumptions? How many potential scientists, mathematicians, and innovators have you discouraged because they didn't fit your narrow expectations?" Tommy, who had somehow appeared in the doorway with Sarah, spoke up. "Professor Chen's right. Marcus helps me with my homework all the time, but he never makes me feel stupid. That's what a real teacher does." "Who let you two in here?" Principal Carter asked, though her tone was more amused than angry. "We were worried about Marcus," Sarah explained. And we have something to show you. About Mr. Whitman." She held up her phone. "I've been collecting stories all day. 17 students have sent me examples of Mr. Whitman's comments. Not just about race. About gender, religion, economic background. There's a pattern." The room fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about one incident or one student. It was about a systemic problem that had been allowed to fester, affecting dozens of students over who knew how many years. Professor Chen spoke into the silence. Principal Carter, I've been in education for 40 years. I've seen brilliant minds from every background imaginable. The only thing that separates those who succeed from those who don't is opportunity and encouragement. Mr. Whitman has been actively denying both to his students based on prejudice. That's not just bad teaching, it's educational malpractice. I think, Principal Carter said slowly, we need to have a much larger conversation about the culture at this school. But first, Mr. Whitman, I believe you made a promise to Marcus. Something about your salary? Mr. Whitman's shoulders slumped in final defeat. Yes. I said if he solved the equation, I'd give him my yearly salary. But surely that was just a verbal contract made in front of witnesses, Dr. Johnson said smoothly. As an MIT professor, I'm quite familiar with contract law. Would you prefer to settle this quietly, or shall we involve the attorneys? The scholarship fund, Marcus said suddenly. Remember? We said it would go to a scholarship fund. For kids who love math but might not get the chance to show it. Professor Chen beamed from the screen. Brilliant idea. I'll personally match whatever amount Mr. Whitman contributes. MIT could always use more diverse voices in mathematics. The next morning, Roosevelt Middle School felt different. The usual morning bustle was subdued, replaced by hushed conversations and furtive glances. Everyone, it seemed, had seen the videos. Marcus Johnson's name was on everyone's lips, but for once, it wasn't accompanied by the casual dismissiveness that had characterized Mr. Whitman's class. In the main office, Principal Carter was dealing with a media storm. Her assistant fielded call after call while she sat in an emergency meeting with Superintendent Dr. Robert Sterling, School Board President Michael Davis, and 3 other board members who had driven in from across the district. The videos have been viewed over 2 million times, Dr. Sterling said, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. We have national news outlets requesting interviews. The NAACP has released a statement. 3 civil rights organizations have offered legal support to the Johnson family. Michael Davis, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, shook his head slowly. How did we let this happen? How did Harold Whitman teach here for 15 years without anyone stopping this behavior? Because he was subtle about it, usually, Principal Carter replied, sliding a folder across the table. I've been reviewing complaints going back years. Individually, each incident could be explained away. A poor choice of words here, a misunderstanding there. It's only when you see the pattern. The pattern of destroying children's confidence based on their race, board member Patricia Williams, an elderly black woman who'd been fighting for educational equity for decades, finished bluntly. We all know teachers like Whitman exist. The question is, what are we doing about it? Meanwhile, in a hastily arranged interview room at the local news station, Lisa Thompson, a seasoned education reporter, was preparing for what would become one of the most watched segments in the station's history. She'd managed to secure interviews with several key players, though notably, Mr. Whitman had declined to comment on advice from his newly hired attorney. Tonight, we explore a story that's captured national attention, Lisa began, looking directly into the camera. A 12-year-old boy, a mathematical genius, and a teacher whose prejudice led to a very public downfall. But this isn't just about one incident, it's about the hidden barriers that countless students face every day. The segment included portions of the viral videos, interviews with education experts, and a particularly powerful statement from Mrs. Patricia Williams: every time a teacher looks at a child and sees a stereotype instead of potential, we lose. We lose innovations, we lose discoveries, we lose the contributions the child could have made to our world. Back at the school, Mr. Whitman sat alone in his empty classroom. His students had been redistributed to other teachers for the day while the administration decided his fate. The famous equation still remained on the board, a monument to his hubris. He stared at it, perhaps finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. His phone rang. It was his wife, Patricia Whitman, a kindergarten teacher at a different school who'd always been proud of her husband's high standards. Harold, she said, her voice strained, I've seen the videos. Tell me it's not as bad as it looks. Patricia, he stopped, unable to find words that would make it better. I never meant for it to go this far. You offered your salary to a child you were certain would fail. You humiliated him because of his race. How far did you intend for it to go? Her voice broke. Do you know what my students are saying? My 5-year-olds are asking if Mr. Whitman is the mean teacher on TV. How do I answer that? The conversation ended with Patricia hanging up, leaving Harold Whitman truly alone with his thoughts for perhaps the first time. At MIT, Dr. Amelia Johnson was in her office when Professor Chen knocked on the door. Amelia, I wanted to check on you. This can't be easy. She looked up from the papers she'd been grading, exhaustion evident in her eyes. You know what the hardest part is, David? It's not the anger. I can handle anger. It's the fact that we tried so hard to give Marcus a normal childhood, and one ignorant man almost destroyed that. But he didn't, Professor Chan reminded her gently. Marcus stood up for himself with more grace and dignity than most adults could manage. You and James raised an extraordinary young man. He shouldn't have had to be extraordinary just to be treated fairly, Amelia replied, the frustration evident in her voice. That's what people don't understand. Black children shouldn't need to be geniuses to deserve respect. Marcus solved that equation, but what about all the children who couldn't? Do they deserve Whitman's contempt? Back at Roosevelt Middle School, the emergency board meeting had reached a crucial juncture. Dr. Sterling stood at the whiteboard different from the one in Mr. Whitman's room, but the irony wasn't lost on anyone. We have several issues to address, he said, writing as he spoke. First, Mr. Whitman's immediate status. Second, support for affected students. Third, systemic changes to prevent this from happening again. I move for immediate suspension pending a full investigation, Patricia Williams said firmly. We cannot have him in a classroom while this is sorted out. Seconded, Michael Davis added quickly. The vote was unanimous. As news of the suspension spread, Lisa Thompson was interviewing Marcus himself. The young boy sat beside his parents, looking smaller than he had when facing down Mr. Whitman, but no less determined. Marcus, Lisa said gently, what would you like people to know about this situation? Marcus thought carefully before answering. I'm good at math, he said simply. But my friend Tommy is amazing at art. Sarah is the best writer I know. Jennifer can sing like an angel. We all have gifts. Mr. Whitman just couldn't see past what we looked like to find out what they were. Do you hate him? Lisa asked. Marcus shook his head. No. I feel sorry for him. Imagine being a teacher and missing out on knowing how special your students are because you're too busy judging them. That's really sad. The interview would later win an award for its impact, but in that moment, it was just a 12-year-old boy speaking truth with the kind of clarity that made adults stop and reconsider their own biases. As the day wore on, the consequences continued to ripple outward. 3 more teachers at different schools in the district quietly submitted requests for sensitivity training, suddenly aware of their own subtle biases. Parents had difficult conversations with their children about prejudice and standing up for what's right. And somewhere in the superintendent's office, plans were being drawn up for district-wide reforms that would be known as the Marcus Johnson Protocol's systematic changes to ensure that no child would face what Marcus had endured. But perhaps the most significant consequence was in Mr. Whitman's empty classroom, where maintenance staff had been asked to leave the equation on the board. It would remain there for the rest of the school year, a reminder to every teacher and student who passed by that brilliance comes in all colors, and prejudice has no place in education. That evening, as the Johnsons sat down to dinner, trying to reclaim some normalcy, Marcus asked his parents a question that showed wisdom beyond his years. Do you think Mr. Whitman will learn from this? James Johnson considered carefully before answering. I hope so, son. People can change, but only if they're willing to see their mistakes. What you did, standing up with dignity and intelligence, you gave him a mirror. Now it's up to him whether he looks into it. 3 days after the incident, a different kind of gathering took place in the Johnson family's living room. It wasn't a formal interview or a meeting with lawyers, but rather a quiet moment with just Marcus, his parents, Tommy, and Principal Carter, who had become an unexpected ally in navigating the aftermath. "I think," Dr. Amelia Johnson said, setting down her coffee cup, "it's time people understood the full story. Not just about the equation or Mr. Whitman, but about why we made the choices we did for Marcus." Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor, absent-mindedly solving a Rubik's Cube while listening. It was a habit his parents had noticed years ago. His hands always needed to be busy when his mind was processing emotional topics. "I was identified as gifted when I was 5, Amelia began, her voice taking on a reflective quality. "Back then, that meant being pulled out of regular classes, put in special programs, labeled as different. By the time I was Marcus's age, I had no real friends. I was the smart black girl, and that was all anyone saw." James reached over and took his wife's hand. "My experience was similar. Accelerated through grades, in college by 15, doctorate by 21. Impressive on paper, lonely in reality. We both struggled with social relationships well into our 20s. That's why," Amelia continued, looking at her son with deep affection, "when Marcus tested off the charts at age 7, we made a different choice. We decided that emotional intelligence and social connections were just as important as academic acceleration." Principal Carter leaned forward, intrigued. "But surely there were programs that could have nurtured both aspects?" "You'd think so," James replied. "We investigated dozens of options. Private schools that promised holistic education but really just wanted to parade Marcus as their trophy. Online programs that would have isolated him entirely. Accelerated tracks that would have put him in high school before he hit puberty." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice quiet but clear. "I didn't want any of that. I wanted friends. I wanted to play basketball badly and laugh about it. I wanted to be in the school play even though I can't act. I wanted to be normal." "Define normal," Tommy interjected with a grin. "Because solving college-level math for fun isn't exactly typical, dude." Marcus smiled back. "Okay, normalish. I just wanted to be Marcus who happens to be good at math, not the genius kid who happens to be named Marcus." Amelia pulled out a photo album, flipping to pictures of Marcus through the years. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a photo of 8-year-old Marcus at a birthday party, covered in cake and laughing with other children. "This is what we wanted for him. Joy. Friendship. Childhood. But we weren't naive," James added. "We knew there would be challenges. We supplemented his education at home, connected him with mentors like Professor Chen, let him audit online courses from universities. He's been publishing mathematical proofs under a pseudonym since he was 10. Principal Carter's eyes widened. "Publishing? At 10? Marcus shrugged, slightly embarrassed. "They're not that big a deal. Just some observations about number patterns and a new approach to certain types of equations. Professor Chen helped me write them properly." "Not that big a deal," Amelia laughed, shaking her head. 3 of his papers have been cited by doctoral candidates. One is being used as a teaching example at Caltech. "But that's exactly why we kept it quiet," James explained. "The moment that becomes public knowledge, Marcus stops being a kid and becomes a commodity. Universities would be recruiting him, media would be hounding him, and his childhood would effectively end." Tommy, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Is that why you never said anything? Even when Mr. Whitman was being horrible to you?" Marcus nodded. "Every time I thought about showing him what I could really do, I imagined what would happen next. Special programs, being separated from my friends, becoming that kid instead of just me. The tragedy," Amelia said, her voice hardening slightly, "is that we chose Roosevelt Middle School specifically because of its diversity and supposed commitment to inclusive education. We thought Marcus would be safe to just be himself there. Instead," Principal Carter said heavily, "he encountered Harold Whitman." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I need you to know that I've been reviewing his records extensively. There were signs I should have caught. Comments in performance reviews that I dismissed as old school thinking. Complaints I didn't investigate thoroughly enough. I failed Marcus and many other students. You're here now, James said simply. That matters. Marcus finished with the Rubik's Cube and set it aside. Can I tell you something weird? He asked. Part of me is actually glad this happened. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. Not the mean stuff, he clarified quickly. But, keeping secrets is hard. Pretending I don't understand things when I do. Watching Mr. Whitman make mistakes on the board and not saying anything. Always holding back. It's exhausting. So what do you want to do now? His mother asked gently. Now that everyone knows? Marcus thought for a long moment. I want to stay at Roosevelt. I want to keep my friends. I want to be in regular classes for most things. But maybe I could do something more with math. Not leaving my friends behind, but not hiding anymore either? Principal Carter smiled. I think we can arrange that. In fact, the district is proposing a new program, Advanced Enrichment, that takes place during study periods and after school. You'd stay with your peer group for core classes but have opportunities to explore your gifts without isolation. And, she added, her smile growing wider, we want you to help design it. Who better to create a program for gifted students than someone who understands both the benefits and the costs of being labeled gifted? Tommy high-fived his friend. That's awesome. And hey, maybe they'll have advanced art too? Because I'm pretty sure my stick figures are revolutionary. Everyone laughed, and for the first time since the incident, the tension truly eased. This wasn't just about recovering from trauma, it was about building something better. There's one more thing, Marcus said, suddenly shy. The scholarship fund that Mr. Whitman's money is going to? I want to help pick the recipients. Not just kids who test well, but kids who love learning and might not get the chance to show it. Kids like your friend Tommy, who sees the world in colors and shapes? Amelia suggested with a smile. Or Sarah, who writes poetry that makes people cry. Or Jennifer, whose music could change hearts. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Being smart isn't just about math. Mr. Whitman never understood that. He thought there was only one kind of intelligence that mattered. And that's perhaps the greatest tragedy of all, Principal Carter reflected. How many types of brilliance did he miss because he was too busy looking for one narrow definition of intelligence and then dismissing even that when it came in a package he didn't expect? As the afternoon wore on, the conversation shifted from past hurts to future possibilities. They discussed the new program, ways to identify and nurture different types of giftedness, and how to create an environment where all students could thrive without having to hide their abilities or face prejudice. But perhaps the most important moment came when Marcus walked Principal Carter to the door. She turned to him and said, Marcus, I want you to know something. In my 20 years in education, I've met many intelligent students. But intelligence without courage is just potential. What you showed, standing up for yourself with dignity, turning a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for change, that's not just smart. That's wise. Marcus smiled, looking every bit the 12-year-old he was. My mom says wisdom is just intelligence plus experience plus empathy. I guess Mr. Whitman gave me the experience part. As Principal Carter drove away, she thought about that definition. Intelligence plus experience plus empathy. If that was wisdom, then Marcus Johnson was indeed wise beyond his years. And if they could build an educational system that nurtured all three components in every child, regardless of race or background, then perhaps some good could come from this painful experience. The school board meeting room had never been so packed. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The emergency session to determine Mr. Harold Whitman's fate had drawn parents, teachers, students, and media from across the state. At the front of the room, 5 school board members sat behind a long table, their expressions grave. Mr. Whitman sat at a smaller table facing them, his attorney beside him. Gone was the confident, condescending teacher who had ruled his classroom with an iron fist. In his place sat a diminished man, his mustache no longer perfectly groomed, his half-bald head gleaming with perspiration under the harsh fluorescent lights. Michael Davis, the board president, called the meeting to order. We're here today to address the incident involving Mr. Harold Whitman and student Marcus Johnson, as well as subsequent revelations about Mr. Whitman's pattern of behavior over his tenure at Roosevelt Middle School. Dr. Robert Sterling, the superintendent, stood to present the findings of the investigation. Over the past week, we've interviewed 127 current and former students, 23 parents, and 15 staff members. We've reviewed 15 years of documentation. He paused, letting the weight of those numbers sink in. The pattern is undeniable. He clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind him. These are documented incidents, corroborated by multiple witnesses. The list began to scroll, telling Latino students they were better suited for vocational training, suggesting female students couldn't understand masculine logic, consistently grading minority students more harshly for equivalent work, making assumptions about students' home lives based on race, discouraging minority students from applying to advanced programs. The list went on and on. Several people in the audience gasped. Others nodded knowingly they'd experienced it firsthand. Patricia Williams, the board member who'd called for Whitman's suspension, leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Whitman, do you have anything to say about these findings?" Whitman's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Whitman shook his head and stood. I never saw it as discrimination," he began, his voice barely audible. "I had high standards. I wanted to push students to be realistic about their abilities." Realistic based on what? Patricia Williams interrupted. Their skin color? Their last names? Their parents' occupations? Whitman faltered. I was trying to help them avoid disappointment. By disappointing them yourself? The voice came from the audience. Everyone turned to see a young woman standing, her professional attire marking her as someone who'd done well despite the odds. "Mr. Whitman, I'm Maria Rodriguez. I was in your class 10 years ago. You told me I'd never make it in engineering, that I should consider becoming a teacher's aide instead. I just graduated from MIT. With honors." Another voice joined hers. James Park. "You said my people were good at repetition, not innovation. Luckily for me, I guess you missed my patent for prosthetic joint technology." One by one, former students stood and shared their stories. Each was a testament to potential that had survived despite Whitman's attempts to crush it. The cumulative effect was devastating. Whitman sank back into his chair, his face ashen. His attorney tried one last defense. "My client has an exemplary record of test scores. His students consistently performed well on standardized tests, because he focused on teaching the students he believed could succeed and ignored the rest," Dr. Sterling interjected. "We've analyzed the data. The achievement gap in Mr. Whitman's classes was significantly wider than in any other teacher's. Students he deemed worthy did indeed excel. Those he dismissed fell further behind each year." Michael Davis called for order as murmurs rippled through the crowd. "We need to address the specific incident with Marcus Johnson. Mr. Whitman, you made a verbal contract in front of witnesses. Are you prepared to honor that commitment?" Whitman's attorney stood quickly. That was clearly not a serious offer. It was serious enough when he thought Marcus would fail. James Johnson's voice cut through from the audience. He stood, his presence commanding attention. Serious enough to humiliate a child in front of his peers. If it was serious then, it's serious now. The board members conferred quietly among themselves before Patricia Williams spoke. "Mr. Whitman, the board has already decided that your employment with this district is terminated, effective immediately. The only question remaining is whether you'll honor your commitment to Marcus voluntarily, or whether the Johnson family will need to pursue legal action." Whitman looked up, his eyes finding Marcus in the audience. The boy sat between his parents, watching with those same calm, intelligent eyes that had first unsettled him. "I'll pay," Whitman said quietly. "To the scholarship fund. Over time, but I'll pay." That's a start, Michael Davis said. But it's not enough. Mr. Whitman, you've damaged countless young lives with your prejudice. What are you prepared to do about that? For the first time, Whitman seemed to truly grasp the magnitude of his actions. I don't know how to fix this. An unexpected voice spoke from the audience. It was Sarah Chen, standing despite her obvious nervousness. Maybe Mr. Whitman could help with the new program? Not as a teacher, she added quickly as people began to protest. But he could help identify other teachers who might have similar biases. He could speak at training sessions about how prejudice can hide behind high standards. The room fell silent, considering this surprising suggestion from one of Whitman's former students. That's very generous, Sarah, Dr. Sterling said carefully. But Mr. Whitman would need to demonstrate genuine understanding of his actions and a commitment to change. I think, Marcus said, standing for the first time, that people can learn. Mr. Whitman spent years learning the wrong lessons about students. Maybe he could spend time learning the right ones. Tommy stood beside his friend. But only if he really wants to change. Not just because he got caught. All eyes turned to Whitman. He sat silent for a long moment, then slowly stood. I need help, he admitted, the words seemingly pulled from deep within. I look at that board, at what Marcus did, and I realize I've been wrong. Not just about him, but about so many students. I thought I was maintaining standards, but I was really maintaining prejudice. His voice broke on the last word. I don't know if I can undo the damage I've done. But if these children, the ones I failed, are willing to give me a chance to learn, then I need to try. Patricia Williams looked skeptical. Words are easy, Mr. Whitman. Change is hard. Then let him prove it, Principal Carter spoke up. Set conditions. Required training, supervised community service, regular evaluations. If he fails to meet them, he faces further consequences. If he succeeds, maybe one converted skeptic could help us identify and change others. The board deliberated for nearly an hour while the audience waited. Finally, they returned with their decision. Mr. Harold Whitman, Michael Davis read from a prepared statement, you are hereby terminated from employment with this school district. You are required to pay $85,000 to the Marcus Johnson Mathematics Opportunity Fund over a period of 5 years. Additionally, should you wish to participate in redemptive justice, you must complete 200 hours of diversity and inclusion training, serve 500 hours of supervised community service in underserved schools, and participate in our bias interruption program as a cautionary voice. He looked up from the paper. This is not forgiveness, Mr. Whitman. This is an opportunity for redemption that your victims are graciously offering. Do not waste it. Whitman nodded, unable to speak. As he was escorted out, he paused near the Johnsons. I'm sorry, he said simply. That's not enough, I know. But I'm sorry. Marcus met his eyes. Prove it, he said quietly. Not to me. To the next student who walks into a classroom looking different from what a teacher expects. Prove it to them. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, conversations buzzed about what they'd witnessed. It wasn't the vengeful takedown many had expected. Instead, it had become something more complex, a community grappling with how to address systemic prejudice while leaving room for growth and change. Dr. Sterling caught up with the Johnson family as they left. Marcus, he said, what you did in there offering a path to redemption that showed remarkable maturity. Marcus shrugged, suddenly looking every bit his 12 years. My mom always says holding on to anger is like trying to solve an equation with the wrong formula. Sometimes you have to try a different approach. Besides, Tommy added with a grin, if Mr. Whitman actually changes, that's way better than if he just stays angry and teaches somewhere else, right? Sarah Chen joined them, still looking thoughtful. Do you really think people can change that much? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I think they should have the chance to try. That's what Mr. Whitman never gave us, the chance to prove we were more than what he assumed. Maybe we can be better than he was. As they walked into the evening air, the weight of the past week began to lift. Justice had been served, but tempered with mercy. Consequences had been imposed, but with the possibility of redemption. And at the center of it all, a 12-year-old boy had shown that true intelligence wasn't just about solving equations, it was about solving human problems with wisdom, courage, and grace. The next morning's newspaper would carry the headline, "Terminated Teacher Offered Path to Redemption by Student He Wronged." But for Marcus and his friends, the real victory was simpler. They could return to school knowing that their worth would no longer be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character and the potential of their minds. And in a filing cabinet in the superintendent's office, a new policy was being drafted, one that would require regular bias training for all teachers, systematic reviews of grading disparities, and most importantly, a recognition that brilliance comes in all colors, backgrounds, and forms. It would be informally known as Marcus's Law, though he would always insist it should be called the Every Student Matters Act. 6 months later, Roosevelt Middle School hosted its first celebration of multiple intelligences, an event that would have been unimaginable before the Whitman incident. The gymnasium was transformed into a showcase of student talents, from mathematical proofs to artistic installations, from musical performances to innovative engineering projects. Marcus stood beside a display showing the famous equation, now permanently preserved in a frame donated by the school board. But more interesting than the equation itself was what surrounded it, photos and stories of students who had found their voices in the months following the incident. And this, Marcus explained to a group of visitors, including Professor Chen and several MIT students who'd come to see the boy whose story had sparked national conversation, is what we call a possibility wall. Every student who was ever told they couldn't do something gets to post their achievement here. The wall was covered. Maria Rodriguez's engineering degree. James Park's patent certificate. Jennifer Walsh's acceptance letter to Juilliard. Tommy's award-winning art piece titled More Than Meets the Eye. Sarah Chen's published short story in a national youth magazine. Dozens of others, each a testament to potential that had survived despite, not because of, their educational experiences. Principal Carter approached with someone the students hadn't expected to see, Harold Whitman. He looked different. His arrogance had been replaced by something harder to define, perhaps humility, perhaps simply awareness. He stayed at the edge of the group, clearly unsure of his welcome. "Mr. Whitman has been volunteering at the Westside Community Center," Principal Carter explained. "Teaching free math tutoring to underprivileged students. His supervisor says he's been transformative." Whitman stepped forward hesitantly. "I wanted to see what grew from my failure," he said quietly. "And to tell you, Marcus, that you were right. The problem wasn't that equation on the board. The problem was the equation in my head, the one where I thought I could calculate a student's worth based on their appearance." He pulled out an envelope. "This is the first payment to the scholarship fund. But more than that." He paused, struggling with words. "3 of my tutoring students are here today. Kids I would have dismissed before. They're all going to summer programs at the university. Turns out, when you expect brilliance instead of assuming limitations, you tend to find it." Marcus studied his former teacher for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Thank you for learning, Mr. Whitman. That's all any of us can do, keep learning." The handshake was brief but significant, a moment of reconciliation that reporters would later describe as the real solution to the equation that had started it all. Dr. Amelia Johnson, watching from nearby, turned to her husband. "Our boy just keeps teaching us, doesn't he?" "Every day," James agreed. "Though I'm not sure we can take credit for his capacity for forgiveness." "That's all him," Amelia smiled. "We just gave him the space to be himself." The event continued with performances and presentations. Tommy unveiled a mural he'd painted for the school, a vibrant celebration of diversity where mathematical equations danced with musical notes, where scientific formulas intertwined with poetry, where every type of intelligence was given equal space to shine. Sarah Chen took the stage to read an essay she'd written about the experience. "We all have gifts," she read, her voice clear and strong. "Sometimes they're obvious, like Marcus's mathematics. Sometimes they're hidden, waiting for someone to believe in them. But the greatest tragedy isn't when those gifts go unrecognized, it's when we let others convince us they don't exist. The audience, a mix of students, parents, teachers, and community members, applauded thunderously. Among them sat several school board members, including Patricia Williams, who had become a fierce advocate for the new programs spawned by the incident. Dr. Sterling took the microphone next. 6 months ago, we faced a crisis that could have torn our community apart. Instead, led by the wisdom of a 12-year-old boy, we chose to transform it into an opportunity. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Marcus Johnson protocols have been adopted by 17 school districts across the state. More applause, though Marcus looked slightly embarrassed by the attention. He still preferred solving equations to making speeches. Furthermore, Dr. Sterling continued, the Marcus Johnson Mathematics Opportunity Fund has raised over $200,000, enough to provide advanced educational opportunities for dozens of students who might otherwise have been overlooked. And yes, Mr. Whitman's contributions have been arriving regularly. Professor Chen was invited to speak about the new partnership between MIT and Roosevelt Middle School. We're not here to steal your brightest students, he assured the audience. We're here to help nurture all types of intelligence while keeping communities and friendships intact. Marcus taught us that brilliance without connection is incomplete. As the formal program wound down, Marcus found himself in his old math classroom, now taught by Ms. Jennifer Martinez, a young teacher who believed in finding the potential in every student. The famous equation had been removed, but something else had taken its place, a quote from Marcus himself, painted in bold letters, everyone can solve something. The trick is finding the right problem. Do you miss it? Tommy asked, joining his friend. Being the secret genius? Marcus laughed. Sometimes. But keeping secrets is exhausting. Besides, now I can help other kids who are hiding what they can do. Like that third grader you've been tutoring? The one who's already doing algebra? Emma, Marcus nodded. She reminds me of me, except she won't have to hide it. That's the difference we're making. Sarah joined them, along with several other classmates. They'd formed a tight-knit group over the months, bound by the shared experience of standing up to injustice. So what's next? Sarah asked. You've revolutionized education, gotten a scholarship fund named after you, and somehow managed to stay humble. What does a 13-year-old do after all that? Marcus grinned. 8th grade. Basketball tryouts. The spring musical, and yes, I'm still a terrible actor. More math, obviously. But also, just being a kid. That's what this was all about, right? The right to just be ourselves? As the sun set through the classroom windows, casting long shadows reminiscent of that fateful day 6 months earlier, the friends sat and talked about their futures. Some would pursue STEM fields, others the arts. Some would become teachers, determined to be better than what they'd experienced. Others would go into law or politics, fighting for equity on a larger scale. But all of them had learned the same crucial lesson, that brilliance comes in many forms, that prejudice diminishes us all, and that sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest solutions: respect, opportunity, and the chance to prove that everyone has something valuable to contribute. The evening ended with an unexpected visitor. Lisa Thompson, the reporter who'd covered the original story, arrived with a film crew. We're doing a follow-up, she explained. About how one incident can spark real change. Would you be willing to talk, Marcus? Marcus looked at his parents, who nodded their approval. Okay, he said. But not just about me. About all of us. About every student who's ever been underestimated. This isn't just my story, it's ours. As the cameras rolled, capturing the transformed school and the students who transformed with it, the message was clear. What had started as one teacher's attempt to humiliate a student had become a movement for educational equity that was spreading across the country. And at the center of it all was a simple truth, written not on a blackboard but in the hearts and minds of everyone who'd witnessed it: when you give students the chance to show their brilliance, all students, regardless of race, gender, or background, they will solve more than equations. They'll solve problems we didn't even know we had. The Marcus Johnson Mathematics Opportunity Fund would go on to support hundreds of students over the years. The Whitman Redemption Program, as it came to be known, would help identify and reform biased educators across the district. And Marcus himself would continue to balance his extraordinary gifts with his determination to remain connected to his community and friends. But perhaps the most lasting legacy was the simplest one. In a 7th grade math classroom in Roosevelt Middle School, prejudice had been given a problem it couldn't solve: the unlimited potential of a child who refused to be limited by someone else's expectations. And that solution, unlike any equation on a board, would last forever. Today's story reminds us that every child deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not through the lens of prejudice or assumption. Marcus's courage in standing up to discrimination, and his grace in offering redemption, shows us that change is possible when we choose understanding over ignorance. In classrooms across the world, there are countless Marcus Johnsons, brilliant minds waiting to be recognized, nurtured, and celebrated regardless of their background. Let's be the teachers, parents, and community members who see potential instead of stereotypes. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more stories that challenge us to build a world where every child's brilliance is recognized and celebrated. Thank you for watching.